Okay, thank you. As I indicated again that if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box or you may raise your hand and we will address your question. Also, the session is being presented and all the recordings and the presentation slides will be posted on our model communities, and a feedback survey will be sent during the session. I would request you to please fill it out so that we may get insight on how this workshop is useful and how we may improve in the future. So before I begin the session, I would like to go over Prof. Elena bio. So Prof. Elena Rose is a visiting professor at the Center for Social Development in Africa, CSDA. She has a Bachelor of Social Work and Masters in Social Work with a cum laude and a PhD from the University of Witwatersrand. She is a former head of Department of Social Work at the Wits and previously served as a member of the South African Council for Social Services for Social Service Professions. Prof. Rose is an honorary life member of the South African Speech Language Hearing Association. She was editor of the South African Journal of Communication Disorders and currently serves on the International Board of Social Work in Healthcare and the Journal of Social Work and Human Rights. So without any further ado, Prof. Elena, you may begin. Can you see the slides, Prof?
Yes, I can see them. Thank you. Thank you
Okay.
very much. Thank you very much, Lawrence.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody.
Thank you.
I'd like to start at the outset by saying that there's no one way in which to convert a dissertation or a research report into a journal article. If you ask 5 different people, they'll probably give you 5 different ways of doing it. This is just what I'm going to share with you this morning is the way that I've developed it over the years, and it works for me. But at the same time, I can't guarantee that if you do follow the steps that you will definitely get accepted for publication, because rejection is a normal process of being in academia. We all go through that process. Okay. Lawrence, can you go on to the next slide, please? I first want to start by discussing some of the reasons why it is very, very important to publish research. In some universities, like at UJ, it's a requirement for PhDs and masters by dissertation. So at UJ, if you're completing your PhD, you have to present, I think, as far as I'm aware at the moment, is a minimum of 2 journal articles. And if you're doing a master's by dissertation, it's 1 journal article. There's no specific requirements for the master's by coursework, that's the minor dissertation or honors level. But I actually encourage all my students from honors level right through to PhD to publish their findings. I feel also that you have an ethical obligation to share your findings with the broader research community. Then also, from the point of view of those healthcare professions like social work, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, psychology, who have to be registered with health profession councils, it's useful getting CPD points, that's continuing professional development. But probably
I'm sorry, Prof, we have lost you there. Can't hear you. I think maybe with the connectivity issues.
aspect of publishing is that it is absolutely essential for any future career. And if you want a career in academia, and if you want to be promoted through the ranks from lecturer to senior lecturer to associate professor to full professor, the key to these for progressing through the is publications. Next slide, please. Lawrence, can you hear me? Lawrence, can you hear me?
Yes, Prof, I can hear you. You were cutting here and there,
Thank
but we can hear you now properly.
Can
you see the slide, Prof?
Can everybody still hear me?
Can you just indicate with the thumbs up if you can hear, Prof, please?
Sorry, please stop. Yes, I can see the slide. If you can't hear me, please stop me.
Okay, not a
what
problem.
I want you to Okay. Okay. Now, what I want to do now is to can all hear, targeting a potential journal. There are 6 main groups of accredited journals. The 2 South African ones, the and the Silo. Those are 4 are international. That's the ISI, the IBSS, and a Norwegian and Scopus. Now, every year they publish a list of the latest accredited journals, and these are published by the university. They are given to the university by the Department of Higher Education, and you need to actually check on those lists to see whether the journal that you're targeting is in fact accredited. If you don't have access to this list, you can always write to me. I've given my email there, and I'll send you the latest list. Sorry, I've said you. I think as far as I know, sorry, the latest list is now 2023. It's very, very important that you avoid non-accredited, or what we refer to as predatory journals. A predatory journal is a journal, and that at least the editor approaches you and offers to publish your research within a very, very short period of time, say like 2 weeks. And then you get landed with and if you agree to actually publish with them, you get landed with an exorbitant fee that you have to pay. So these predatory journals are basically there simply for to make profit. They are not recognized by the universities, so you will not get credit for it. So it's very, very important to avoid them. You can also get a list of the predatory journals from your university. The next point is to decide whether you want to target either a local South African journal, a regional African journal, or an international journal, depending on the topic that you've covered in your dissertation. Now, there are various AI ways of actually finding a suitable journal. The different publishing houses like Taylor and Francis, Sage, Wiley, Elsevier, they've all got what is referred to as a journal suggester or a journal recommender, where you simply paste your abstract in and you click on reveal suggested journals, and with a list of potential journals. I found that some of the suggestions that come up are very helpful. Others are way off the mark. It's just up to you, but it does help you so that you don't have to go through the very, very long list of accredited journals, which runs into the thousands. Sorry, Lawrence, next slide, please.
Can you see the slide, Prof?
Yes, I've got it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Okay. Did I cut, or was I cutting out a lot?
Yes, you're cutting out a bit, but I think we can hear you, Prof. That's fine.
Okay, I'll carry on. Okay. Very, very important that you read the journal requirements under the section called Scope of the Journal, because then you can find out what is the purpose of the journal and the type of articles that they prefer, and ensure that your topic fits within the scope of the journal. It's also very helpful if you go through the table of contents of the journal, of maybe the latest issue of the journal, and just to get an idea of the type of articles that they publish and whether your article would fit in. Then you must look, it's important that you look under guidelines for authors, and you'll see the word count. Some they give you a word count. They usually give
You're
for
cutting,
the
Prof.
full text, and often give you word count for the abstract. Oh dear. All right. Okay, I'll carry on because most of what I'm saying is actually written on the slides.
Yes,
Can you hear
that's
me
no problem.
now?
Yes, I can hear you, Prof. Now you
Yes.
may proceed, Prof. No problem, not a problem. Thank you.
Okay. Also, very important that you check whether the journal charges article processing, or what they refer to as page fees. If they charge page fees, you need to check with your department whether they will pay for the page fees, because it can come to, and it's usually South African journals that charge page fees. Enough pages, it could come to anything between 5,000 and 10,000 rand. So you need to check whether your department will be prepared to pay. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, when you start to write, this is my way of doing it. I first make a digital copy of the report, or the dissertation or the thesis, and give it another name. And then you need to try and make the process more manageable. And this can be done by deleting all the unnecessary parts. For example, the title page, except for the actual title, delete the table of contents, the affidavit, the acknowledgements, and all the appendix. You also need to delete unnecessary definitions. For example, I know some supervisors expect you, when you write your dissertation, to actually, define, what is a sample, what is a research design. If they've asked you to include those definitions, delete those definitions, because journals assume that that their readers know what a sample is and what a research design, etc., is. Also, if you've got summaries at the end of each chapter, delete those, and keep cutting back until you reach the required word count. And this can often involve, many drafts. Refine each draft, and very, very important that you proofread the final version. And also ensure that you've prepared all the parts before you begin the submission process. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, most journals require online submissions, but there are still a few where you can just email your article to them. For example, South African Journal of Education. It's a very, very good journal, and all you have to do there is, it's a very easy process. You just simply submit it to your journal article to the administrative officer. But most other journals require online submissions. And usually the most common documents that you need for your submission are things like the title page, the cover letter, the abstract and keywords, the main text, figures and tables. And I'm going to discuss each of them separately. Next, please, Lawrence. Okay, that all right, the title page. This page is usually a separate file with it. It contains the title of the article and all the identifying details of all the authors, all their names, the affiliation. So that would be University of Johannesburg, the email of each separate author, the postal addresses, and the telephone numbers. And don't forget, if you're sending it overseas, you must include the international codes. And something that I want to emphasize, that, oh, sorry, can you just go back, please? That students have a choice of writing either on their own or co-authoring with a supervisor as a second author. It's basically up to the student to make that decision. Now, on your title page, you need to indicate who is the corresponding author, because all the correspondence will be sent to that particular author. You can decide whether you want to keep the same title that you used for your dissertation. The title can be catchy, or it can be very conservative. And very, very important that you keep to the word count and you avoid acronyms and redundant phrases like an investigation into or an exploratory study of. And the reason why it's important to keep to the word count for the title is that when you're doing the online submission, if you exceed that word count, you will be cut off and you won't be allowed to complete the title. And there you'll be sitting trying to think of a different title with a shorter word count. Okay, now some journals require you to insert on the title page your word count. Some require a running head, and a running head is an abbreviated title. And then more and more journals are asking for your ORCID ID. For those of you who are not familiar with the ORCID, ORCID stands for Open Researcher and Contributor ID. And it will be your unique research ID. So that even if there are other people who have an identical name as you have, you will have your own ORCID number. And it's very, very easy to register. To get your ORCID number, you simply go to that https://orcid.org, and it will take you not more than 2 minutes to actually register and get your ORCID ID. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, it used to be compulsory in most journals to include a cover letter, but many journals are now actually opting to actually not have the cover letter. So you need to check with your on the website of the journal that you're targeting whether they require a cover letter. But if they do require one, it's written to the editor. Editor of the journal, preferably on a university letterhead, but it doesn't have to be a letterhead. And you just basically state it in the letter is usually about half a page. State that you're submitting an article titled such and such. It's authored by X and Y, and you're submitting it for possible publication in the journal. And then you give the name of the journal. State briefly in one sentence what the aim of the study was and the contribution it makes to literature. And also state only in one sentence why you believe the article will be of interest to the readership of that journal. And very important that you need to state that the manuscript is based on original research that received ethics clearance from a university ethics research committee. And also what they want to know is that if the article has not been published previously and is not currently under review elsewhere. Next slide, please. Okay, now the abstract and keywords. It's very important that you formulate your abstract in a concise and compelling way, and that it's of relevance to both a local and a global audience, because that's the first thing they read. And if they don't find it compelling and interesting, they will not go on to read the rest of your article. Now, some journals require an unstructured abstract in the form of a single paragraph, while other journals require a structured abstract with subheadings. And the most common subheadings are background, aim, method, findings, and conclusion. And under the background, you need to state in just 1 or 2 sentences why you conducted the research. Under the aim, what was the purpose of your study? Under the method, what you did. Under the findings, what you found. And under conclusion, the implications or the take-home message from your study. And it's also important that you write in the past tense, and that below abstract you include all the keywords. Sort of next slide, please. Most journals usually specify the maximum number of keywords, and sometimes you're able to select your own keywords, or with other journals you have to choose keywords from a menu of words that they provide. And always remember that if you're targeting an international journal, it's important to include the term South Africa as one of your keywords. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going to discuss the main text. In more and more journals, they're asking for 2 separate files. One will be completely anonymous, with no identifying details, and the other one will contain identifying details. The one that is anonymous will be sent to the identifying details will be kept by the editor. Now you need to write in a clear, objective style. Try to avoid emotional language, and very, very important that you support all statements with references. Now the main text is usually made up of the following subsections. First, the introduction, the method, the results, discussion, acknowledge if you any people or organizations acknowledge, then reference. Next slide, please. Okay, now with the introduction, with some journals, they expect you to include the heading introduction, while other journals expect you to just start straight away after you've set down your title, you've given your abstract, you go straight into the introduction without a heading. Now, my personal preference is to include the contents from the literature review and the theoretical framework under the introduction, that they all, both those sections actually fall under the introduction. The introduction is also very important because it needs to capture the attention of the reader. And here with the introduction, it's helpful if you adopt a deductive approach, where you start broadly and you become more specific. And I'm going to give you an example, a hypothetical example using the deductive approach. Lawrence, next slide, please. Okay, here we have a picture of an inverted pyramid showing the deductive approach, where you start very broadly discussing your research area. Then you go a little bit more narrower, and you discuss your research problem and the gap in the research literature. And then you narrow it down to the outcome study and the potential outcome. Next slide. Okay, here I've taken a hypothetical example to show how I actually use this particular format for the introduction. Okay, with the first broad area was the research area and why it is important. So I've taken the example of tuberculosis. Not that I'm an expert or not that I actually know anything about tuberculosis, but it just lends itself to this example. So you can talk a little bit about tuberculosis. You can include definitions of tuberculosis, the number of people affected locally, maybe the impact on health and well-being, important studies that have been conducted on the topic, that is the research literature. Okay, that's the broad area. Then you go on to the research problem, with obviously without headings there. Now, the problem that you've identified is that people don't comply with treatment protocols, and they develop multi-drug resistant strains. And here you could bring in maybe the theories on compliance. That is your theoretical framework. Then you talk about the dearth of research on why people get to the treatment protocols. That would be the gap in the research literature. Then you go on to your aim. So therefore, you make a statement like, therefore, the aim of the study was to explore the reasons for persons diagnosed with TB not adhering to treatment protocols in the long term. And then finally, at the end of the introduction, you could have maybe in one sentence where you highlight the potential outcome or significance. So you could say something like, it was anticipated that the study would have implications for the healthcare of persons diagnosed with TB and would yield recommendations for policy and practice in this regard. Next slide, please. Okay, now when you write the paper, it's very, very important that you pay attention to the logical sequencing of ideas and your paragraphs. And it's helpful if you can use linking words like however, nevertheless, in contrast to, in addition, moreover, furthermore. And ensure that each paragraph is linked to the paragraph before and the paragraph afterwards. And each paragraph should only contain one central idea. Very important to include a range of recent up-to-date sources, not older than 10 years, unless they are a classic text. So, for example, if you're using like Bronfenbrenner, which is 1979, that would be okay because it is a seminal classic text. I've said not older than 10 years, but actually you should try and keep your sources within the last 5 years. It just makes a better impression on editors. Now, if you're targeting a South African journal, your references can be predominantly South African, but for international journals, they should be mainly international. And also very important to be selective about what you include and what you leave out. You can't include everything, especially if you've got a very, very limited word count. Also try to avoid self-plagiarism by referencing your earlier work if you have published earlier, and keep self-citations to a minimum. Also try to avoid what is referred to as salami slicing, where you try to get numerous articles from one project. So, for example, it's quite acceptable to get like maybe 3 to 5 articles or something like that from your a PhD, but don't then go and try to get 10 or 12 articles, because then it's referred to as salami slicing. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, with the method, you can either write the section with everything under the single title of method, or you can use subheadings like you probably use when you're writing your and if you use subheadings, these are usually but you don't have to keep to them: research design, population and sample, research tool, method of data collection, which includes the pre-test or the pilot study if you conducted one, the data analysis, trustworthiness and ethical considerations. Now, with regard to the participant demographic profile, some journals prefer that you insert that section into the methodology section, while others prefer it to be placed in the results section. So just check on the journal, read previous articles that have been published in the journal to see where the participant demographic profile is placed. Now, the method section needs to be written very briefly and succinctly. So, for example, if you are talking about ethical considerations, only write that in maybe 1 or 2 sentences. Don't include any definitions of qualitative research, but it's very, very important to include a justification. You can say you chose a qualitative interpretivist paradigm, but you must justify why you selected your approach. And next slide, please. Okay, now the results. Now, with the results and discussion may be set out in either separate sections or combined. And just from my experience, I found that most international journals tend to prefer to have them separated. So if you've written them together in a combined manner for your dissertation, you then need to separate them for the article. And my personal preference is to present the findings in accordance with the objectives of the study. If you're planning to include any tables or figures, most journals require that inserted at the end of the article or in separate files. And for the journal where you want these the tables or the figures to be placed, and you'll make a statement in the middle of the text, and you'll say insert table 1 about here, or insert figure 2 about here, so that the journal administrators know where to place these figures and tables. Now, if you decide to separate your results and discussion, only include your findings under the results, and don't include any interpretation of your findings or references to the literature or the theoretical. Various references to the literature and the theoretical framework need to go into and in the discussion section. With qualitative research, the findings can be illustrated with quotes, whereas the findings from quantitative research can be illustrated with a variety of bar charts, pie diagrams, tables, etc. Next slide, please. Okay. With the discussion section, it's very important that you discuss the meaning or the interpretation of your findings. Also, try to relate them to the the research literature and compare and contrast your findings with findings from previous research. So you found X, Y, and Z in contrast to so-and-so who found something else. Or you could say that your findings were consistent with those obtained by such and such a researcher. Very important to relate your findings to the theoretical framework. Also try to note any patterns in your findings and whether your results were expected or unexpected. Were they surprising or not? At the end of the discussion, it's important that you insert and acknowledge your limitations. So you could end, for example, at the end of discussion, you could say something like, in interpreting these findings, it's important to acknowledge the limitations inherent in the research design and methodology, and then mention those limitations. Lawrence, next slide, please. Okay. Now, with the conclusion section, it can be either a separate section or the conclusion can be part of your discussion, depending on the journal that you're targeting. Conclusions are very important because they help to round off your argument, and they provide the reader with a take-home message. And I find that students often confuse conclusions with findings, but they're not the same. Now, we need to consider what are the differences. What is the difference between a conclusion and a finding? Thank you. Conclusions are what you draw from your findings. And I'll illustrate this with an example. If, for example, you were studying alcohol consumption among students, you may have found that more males than females tended to drink spirits. You could then conclude that gender played a role in the type of alcohol consumed by the participants in your study. Also very, very important that you don't generalize beyond your studies to the broadest population unless you have employed a large representative probability sample. Also, another factor that you need to include in your conclusion is to mention in either one or two sentences the contribution or the potential contribution of your study. Most journals also require recommendations, and these recommendations depend on the focus of the journal. So if, for example, the focus is on development, then you need to highlight implications for development. If the focus is on practice, you need to highlight implications for practice. If the focus is on theory, then you need to highlight implications for theory. Next slide, please. Okay, if you've got an acknowledgement section, and if there were people who made a significant contribution or helped to fund the study, for example, if you're funded by the NRF or something like that, write the word remove for bind review, as if it's an individual person, could potentially identify you and influence the reviewers. And more and more people are using AI, such as ChatGPT. If you use ChatGPT, the source must be acknowledged. They will. Most journals actually submit your articles through something called, I think it's called Zero GPT or something like that. Just as they submit it through plagiarism software, so they can actually pick up whether you used AI or whether you were plagiarizing. Okay, with references, important that you apply the referencing conventions stipulated by the journal. It could be like American Psychological Association, APA, Harvard, Chicago, whatever. And it will state in the journal website what referencing conventions they require. And usually most journals provide examples of the exact format for referencing books, journal articles, websites, newspaper articles, etc. Very, very important that you ensure that all references mentioned in the text are included in the reference list at the end. And what I'm finding that even if you used, for example, for your dissertation, you used references that where you didn't have to include the date when you accessed those references, try to actually include the date, because journals often ask for that. Okay, next one. With open access. If you want now a webinar on its own, so I'm just going to speak very briefly on this. If you want an accepted article to be freely available to all readers, then you can select open access. But the charges are usually exorbitant, except in the case of some SAGE and AOSIS journals. And also more recently, the library at UJ is now joined a certain association where they where articles that are published in by certain journals are or become open access free of charge. So if the library is a member of that particular association, then you get your open access free of charge. I'll give you an example. South African Journal of Psychology is an open access journal, and you don't pay any open access fees. Now, when you send to the journal, you might have to wait. They might reply immediately and say, sorry, but it doesn't. Your article doesn't fit in with the focus of this journal. So then you know that you must target another journal. Usually it takes several months. And then there are different responses that you could get. You could get accept as is, which is very, very rare. And I know only of one particular person who actually won a Nobel Prize for his article. And that was, he even said that was the only article that he'd ever written that was accept as is. So this is very rare. You will be very lucky if you get accepted with, or at least that they request minor revisions. But the most common response is major revisions. And then, of course, you could get reject. Next slide, please. Now, it's very important that you the tone that you adopt in responding to reviewers' comments for revisions. You need to be courteous and professional. Don't get involved in an argument with them. If you really don't agree with them, present your counter argument in a very courteous and rational manner. But try to address all their concerns, comments as a learning experience. I personally find that I've been publishing for years and years, but I still learn from every comment that I receive from a reviewer. Now, according to Taylor and Francis, there are the most common reasons for rejection are firstly that it's been sent to the wrong journal. It doesn't fit with the journal's scope or policies. Secondly, that it's not a true journal article. For example, there's poor structure or language. The author didn't follow the journal's guidelines. It could be regarded as an unsound manuscript. For example, it lacks a theoretical framework. or it lacks objectivity or is unethical. For example, there's been duplicate submission or plagiarism. So those are the most common reasons for rejection. Okay, now what to do if your paper is rejected? First of all, you'll probably feel very, very disappointed. This is quite normal. What I would actually recommend is that, okay, you read what they've said, then you put the rejection letter and you sleep on it. And the next morning or 1 or 2 days later, you go back and you reread what they've said. And by then you've had a bit of time to process the rejection. Try to actually address as many of the concerns raised by the reviewers. And then I would really recommend that you submit the revised version to another journal, because the fact that your article or your manuscript was rejected by one journal does not necessarily mean it will automatically reject by another journal. Lawrence, the next slide, please. Okay, that was actually my last slide. I just want to say thank you and good luck with your submissions.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. Elena. Really, appreciate the very insightful, presentation on, publication, writing. And obviously, there's a lot of students now that have submitted, the PhD, their masters, and obviously, they're just preparing to also, do their journal articles as well, to write the journal articles. And, we really appreciate your insights, based on this workshop. And I don't know if there is any questions from the participants, if you can take time for questions right now. So if you have any questions, as I indicated in the beginning, you may raise your hand or you may type in the chat box and I will address to Professor, then she will address the questions. Thank you so much. I see there is a hand raised by Nena. Let me just allow everyone's mics. Then you can unmute and speak from your side. So I've allowed everybody's mics. So Nina, you may unmute and speak. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Prof. Well, my question is regarding the salami slicing. So some of our colleagues, they have an impression that, when you are writing your dissertation or even thesis, is that you can publish from each and every objective of your study. So for example, if you have about 4 objectives, you can break that into like 4 journals. So I just want to hear from you, would that really, be advisable or what?
Yeah, obviously it depends on your particular study and whether you've got enough within those 4 objectives. You could write 4 articles on that. When I mean by salami slicing, it's usually when people go sort of, overdo it, that they write about every single, they try to write an article about every single small aspect of the study. And that is regarded as a salami slicing, and it's regarded as an unethical practice. But just 4 articles or 4 or 5, that is fine.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I see there's a hand up by Katutselo. You may unmute and speak.
Thank you very much, Prof, for an insightful presentation. I've got 2 questions very briefly. One is, if you received major revisions on your article and you respond, trying, of course, as best as you can to meet their requirements, is it likely that you could move from major revisions to rejected?
Yes, it is. It is possible. Look, in
Okay.
most cases, if you do the major revisions to the satisfaction, you see they go back to both the reviewers. It's usually 2 or 3 reviewers. They have to be satisfied that you've addressed their particular concerns. Maybe you've misunderstood them, or you haven't addressed them properly or adequately. Then they could come to the decision to reject. That's why I feel it's very, very important to address every single point that they make. Most times you could have then it doesn't necessarily go from major revision to reject, but it goes from major revisions. That's a first set of revisions, and then they could ask for a second set of revisions, or even a third set of revisions. But each time you get closer and closer to your goal, and then eventually it gets accepted. But there is always the chance that it could be rejected.
That, and then the last one I want to ask, which is sort of coupled with a comment, is that
Yes.
because one cannot submit to more than one journal publishers at the same time, it means you basically wait. And I'm thinking to
Yes.
myself, now that the publication has become a prerequisite, you run a possibility of finishing your work and probably wait for a whole year trying to just get publication going through. And I'm wondering, in fact, it could even be longer, I guess, given what
Much
is going
longer.
on. So
A year.
is there a way, Prof, of circumventing this delay? So it's just really a question of hurry up and wait,
Yes, unfortunately, a year is actually usually the minimum time. It usually
Wow.
takes longer because there is, everybody throughout the world is submitting publications. There are far more people submitting publications now in 2024 than there were, for example, 10 years ago. There's, excuse me. So the wait is very, very long. And you know what? I've just had one article accepted. It took 3 years. And then you're aware of the fact that that the longer you wait, the more it's actually your work is getting out of date. And that then if it is rejected and you have to submit to another journal, you need to add in some more recent references and make it more up to date. But that is the reality. You've waited several months and you haven't, for example, if you waited maybe 3 or 4 months and you haven't received any response, then I would write a very courteous letter to the editor to say, you submitted the article on such and such a date, and it is now such and such a date. It's now X number of months later, and you wonder whether any decision has been made about the article. They'll usually respond to you.
Very much, Prof.
But it is a reality, and these things happen. Some journals are very, very efficient, and they will, the turnaround time is very, very quick. And that's why people tend to also fall for the predatory journals, because the predatory journals promise you this very, very quick turnaround time. But meanwhile, if you submit to them, you won't get any credit, and the university won't get any subsidy for them.
Okay,
Not sure if that answers your question.
I think his question is sorted. I think he had some connection issues. I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah. I think he left the chat. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a question in the chat box, rather, Prof. It says if a journal discovers that a submission contains plagiarism, will it simply be rejected, or are there formal penalties imposed by the journal or university? And additionally, would the author typically be asked to make corrections, or are there further consequences?
It depends on the journal. Sometimes if they note plagiarism, but there isn't, like, for example, too much plagiarism, then they could actually draw your attention to it and ask you to reword that particular section or those particular sections. But if there is, an excessive amount of plagiarism, they could reject it completely. And and not even consider, sending it out for review. And please check also for the AI as well, because it's very easy for them for journal editors to pick up like things like Grammarly or paragraphing and those kind of AI tools.
Okay. Thank you so much. Prof, I just have a question. With regards to, journal article submissions, is there a particular word count that they require, or it differs from journal to journal?
Oh, yes, it differs from journal to journal. Usually it's the low word counts are like maybe 5,000 words. With some journals, they'll actually, it goes up to about 10,000 words. Usually these highly qualitative journals will allow you a higher word count. But it'll be, on average, it's about, I would say, 7,000 words. And try not to exceed that, otherwise it will be sent back. And that's why you need to keep on doing, draft after draft, where you cut down, and it can be very painful because you feel, you've put so much effort into your dissertation, your thesis, and now you have to cut out all these things that you've considered very important and that you felt were, sort of adding to the study. But you have to be very ruthless and just chop and chop. Then they'll ask you, okay, once you've reached that, that word count, when it comes back from the, like, give justification for this, explain why you did that, or something like that. And all those things will again then add to your word count. They often usually accept it with the changes that made. You usually make the changes, you add in, you highlight the sections that you've added in, and usually they accept that higher word count because the reviewers have asked for it. But in other cases, they might say to you, "Oh, it still grossly exceeds the word count. Cut back again," depending on the journal.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. So usually it's the qualitative that require a higher word count more than the quantitative study.
That's sort of, that's really a generalization that I made. I think just check with the actual journal that you're targeting. I'm just thinking, for example, child and youth care services. They allow you, as far as I remember, something like 10,000. Whereas, sort of other journals will only be like 5,000.
Okay. I see somebody I just followed up on the question that I asked. And it says that.
And then, so then, if the word count.
So you're cutting a bit, Prof.
You have a very low word count, then you need to, for example, leave out in your Sorry, can't hear what?
You're cutting a bit, Prof. Can hear you.
I'm not speaking. Sorry, I'm not speaking. I've finished speaking. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. So there was a follow-up question which says, is this word count from the title abstract all the way to the references, like the word count, the full word count, or is just like the content? Sorry, Prof, can you hear me?
Okay, they usually give you the full count for the full article, including all the references that
You're cutting again, Prof.
abstract. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, Prof, I can hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, Prof, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, usually the word count includes, can you hear me now? Okay, the word count includes everything. That is, everything, the title, the abstract, the main text, the references, and the figures and tables. But within that word count, they will give you a specific.
And now they booked me from Oliver Tambo Airport at 22:20.
Still off.
Word count for the abstract. The abstract usually has a separate word count, but it's part of the total word count. And then there are other journals where they say that the give excludes the abstract references. You just have to check on the website of that particular journal because they differ.
Yes, Prof, we'll definitely do that. We'll definitely do that. I think there is a last question in the chat box. Can you hear me, Prof? Hi, Prof, can you hear me? Yes, Prof, can you hear me?
Yes, but I couldn't hear the question.
Oh, sorry. Let me just read it out for you. So the question is, does one have to paraphrase everything when submitting sections of thesis chapters for publication? Did you get that, Prof?
Yes, no, but you don't have to paraphrase it from your when you've already paraphrased it in your dissertation. You can take it out word for word from your dissertation, but then just cut down the number of sentences. But you can use the same words in your dissertation that you use in your article. You don't have to paraphrase that.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much, Prof. There is a hand raised by Nina.
Yes.
You may proceed.
Thank you very much, sir. Just another one. I mean, just for you, Prof, to help elaborate for me, you mentioned in your slide that for South African journals, references can be predominantly South African, but for international journal, they should actually be international. Can you help elaborate on that?
Yes. Look, you can include both local South African and international in both kinds of journals, but you need to have possibly more international references in you're targeting an international, or at least don't have it only South African. You have to include the international references as well. so that it will be relevant to an international audience.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Is there any other questions from anyone? If you would like to say anything or you have any question or
Maybe
comment.
Sorry, maybe I used the wrong word. Maybe it shouldn't be, maybe, sorry.
You're cutting there, Prof. I think lost you again.
Oh, I wasn't speaking.
Oh, okay, perfect. I just wanted to ask if there's any questions from our participants. If anybody has anything to say, you'd like to raise a comment or something before we may end the session. Just to elaborate, please kindly note that I have posted the feedback survey as well in the chat section. Please kindly fill it out so that we may get insight on how this workshop are useful to all our participants. And yeah, thank you so much. Yes, Prof, is there anything more you'd like to say?
I just wanted to apologize for the fact that I had a bad connection and I kept on cutting out, and it took quite some time to actually start.
Not a problem at all, Prof. You know, these connection issues, you know, they happen, and I'm just glad that we managed to proceed with the workshop and it went well. Thank you so much again to all our participants and to you, Prof. Elena, for taking your time to present this workshop, and we really appreciate your insights, you know, based on this publication writing. And you know, it really comes at a very crucial time for all the participants, all the students that are waiting their submissions. And thank you again, Prof. And thank you to all the participants. So we'll be closing the session. If there's anything more that you'd like to add, Prof, before I close the session. Thank you so much to all the participants again, and to you, Prof. Elena.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, and have yourself a very good day further. Thank you so much again to all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.